Hello friends, hopefully this sounds better. So I just restarted OBS and that seemed to have fixed the problem, at least in the local recordings. So, all right, everybody seems to be saying, oh yeah, better, much better. All right, so that was an interesting experience. Fun thing with live stream is you can do this 100 times and every once in a while there's still something that surprises you. So what I was saying basically is that this is our first post-build stream, and I don't know about you, but I enjoyed build quite a bit. I only had one session, which was a generic Q&A session, so I've not given any talks. So I'm not really biased, so I'm just curious what people think who saw it, whether they liked the format. I personally enjoyed a lot of the stuff that I saw. I thought it would be more of a sad thing because, you know, I guess pretty much every builder was in person and attended our booth and was answering questions, and it was a bit sad that this didn't happen, so I missed a bunch of people that I normally meet at Build. So curious what people think about Build. Today is interesting because I don't really have a particular thing to do. There's a bunch of small things that I think in aggregate are kind of cool, so that's why I named our stream Staying on Top of Things, because I don't know about you, but it is somewhat of a challenge to just effectively have an open source project and be on top of what you want to do and clean up things and have the bugs organized and yeah, make sure that you don't create a mess, right? Because as the code base grows, it's one of those things that is genuinely hard. And to me, it's one of the most, I guess, frustrating parts of programming that every once in a while you just look at the code and you're not happy. You can't really pinpoint why you're not happy, but it's just a perception of quality. It's a perception of this all being a mess, and then your urge to just burn it all to the ground and start over intensifies, and eventually you might succumb to that and then start over. But if you don't really fix the problem, it's just a matter of time until you get yourself into the state again, and then the whole thing just repeats, right? And I think we now have, I want to say, about 10,000 lines of code, I think, in our code base. So it's not tiny, right? But it's also not ginormous by any stretch, right? I've worked on larger projects, but similar to your room, right? Every once in a while, you just have to clean up things, you know, do some note taking for yourself, just, you know, make sure that certain things have to happen in order to keep this in a pristine state, so that when you go back to the code base, you're getting excited to work on it rather than getting, you know, a long face and being depressed that you have to work on that code base, right? That's not something you want to be in. So, does anybody have any questions in chat or suggestions to do? Otherwise, I will just go over our PRs, because there's a bunch of PRs that I promised that I will merge, and I think today is the day where we will do that, no matter what. So let's start. So there's a few PRs here, so that I really want to merge the local function one, because I think local functions are cool. I think I asked, so I've filed an issue for that, that I want to merge this. So if Nemit 12 is willing to do that, I will let them rebase the PR and make sure that things can be merged. And otherwise, I will happily do that, because, you know, I was sitting on this PR for a while, and the reason I was sitting on this PR for a while is because I wanted to first figure out where we take the compiler itself. So I'm quite happy now where we are, and I'm also somewhat confident that adding local functions is not a ginormous undertaking. So yeah, sometimes when that happens, you have merge conflicts. As you can see here, pretty much every file that is in this PR is conflicted. How many files are in here? 25 files, yeah, and we have like, yeah, a good chunk of them are conflicted, right? Happens. Another reason why you don't want to sit on PRs for too long usually. And this one is, you know, March 21st, 2019. So yeah, pretty much exactly a year now. That is not a winning proposition usually. That's also why, by the way, I introduced this label here in issues, where I said, like, here's certain things I want to do in episodes. It's usually the beefy things that I mark this way, so that people don't submit ginormous PRs and then get frustrated that I don't merge them. But that's another thing for almost any project, is be clear what your expectations are, right? And I think I did not do a good job in the beginning here. But that's also partially because I didn't really have expectations for myself either, which makes it challenging to express them to other people. All right, so now let's actually go in. This is one of the things that we wanted to merge. And since Nirmal4G is also on the chat, there's probably a bunch of things I can ask. I've reviewed this at least a few times, so just remind myself what this does. Clean up packages, scripts and tasks, build samples in CI. That's an interesting thing. The solution file for our projects. Interesting. I'm actually amazed this works. But I guess why would it not, right? It just invokes .NET built on the project file. Probably won't work when you open it in Visual Studio. I guess keep scrolling on this one. Yeah, people don't like the name. Naming is hard. I mean, there's a reason why it's one of those hardest problems in computer science. This is currently broken due to references not being included, so it emits typed, not resolved errors. One way to solve this is by supporting RSP response files to take defaults from when building. It will also be helpful for MSI too. Yes. Yeah, I think this whole target here, this is what I think it is. So why is that broken though? Is this the target where we still invoke the compiler directly? Yeah. Yeah, I don't care about this one. I think this one was just a temporary hack before we actually had an MS build project type. Yeah, this one we should just get rid of entirely. Quite frankly. Well, this is interesting to run the interpreter, I guess. Alright, so we have a solution now for the samples. We're building the samples. We have a batch file that invokes them in the actual solution dir, which makes sense. Yeah. And exits when the building fails. Makes sense. Then the same thing for shell. Yeah, I have no idea whether that is valid bash scripting, but we'll find out. Same thing, we just use this one instead. So what I don't understand is, like, why did you do this? So what's the point of building it and then calling run? That's exactly what run will do anyway. That seems superfluous. I mean, I understand this part here, and I would keep this one as well to make sure that we don't have relative paths when we invoke the batch file from somewhere else, but building and then exiting seems superfluous. This just makes the script more complicated. MSC should be able to use it standalone. I mean, MSC works standalone, right? That's effectively what we invoke from MS build anyway. It's just that invoking MSC directly, or a compiler right now, is, as you said, it's more work because you have to pass in references, right? It just, I mean, who invokes CSC directly these days, right? That's not many people. So that's why I guess I don't care. I mean, the experience is as good as it is for all compilers. And CSC directly is also not a winning proposition these days. I don't even know whether the response file on .NET Core is doing something meaningful. It probably does, but yeah, I mean, I would probably simplify this here. Like, I mean, you said it's easier for beginners. I think run is easier for beginners than a script with like multiple lines, but maybe that's just me. MSI, that makes sense. It's the same thing basically. Built up props. Since we're only targeting single framework, we don't need to append the short TFM and read to the output paths. Sure. I guess this is for ordering alphabetically. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. This command line got out of hand. I mean, one thing I massively dislike with MS Build is that there really isn't any notion of private variables. So doing things like this unfortunately pollutes the overall namespace. I mean, the way we deal with this in the SDK itself is that we prefix everything with underscores, but it's still global namespace. It just makes it clear that people shouldn't use it, but yeah, not great. And what is happening here? Why do I have? Okay, fine. Yeah, that's a sample solution. Feature strict, nullable, lang version. So we enable nullable for everything now. That one might backfire, because that means we have to do the rest for the solution. I suppose you turn it off in the other projects then. But yes, I mean, eventually we want to turn it off for everything, right? But no, we're not doing it for everything. I haven't seen this before. Where was this before? Oh, it wasn't the sample projects. I see. It's one of those things where the diff seems very weird. I don't know what the alignment issue here is, but as far as I can tell, you just inserted this thing before, so I have no idea why the diff looks so weird. I guess you also edited the lines. Oh yeah, you added this thing and then we wrapped. I guess that's why everything is confused. Yes. I see. So we fixed it with the toolset reference, which I think fixes the the generator on Unix systems. Okay, yeah, that's cool. That makes sense. Is packable false? Is publishable false? I see. Okay, yeah, that's the way to do it. What do these two things really do? Isn't that just disabling when you call publish and pack on it? Or does it do anything more than that? I have a bunch of no warning directory.build and it seems VS Code doesn't recognize them only when they are in CS project itself. Am I missing something there? No. My understanding is that VS Code generally doesn't use the MS Build workspace to host the, I should say, the C# extension that you use in VS Code generally doesn't use MS Build workspace to evaluate the project. So I guess what ends up happening is they literally fetch out, like if, I'm actually surprised that no one works at all. And so what I think they're doing is instead of evaluating the project, they're just opening the project file and extracting or fishing out the no warn entries, which if you would actually evaluate the MS Build project, the no warn value would actually be coming from the directory.build.props. So that's probably why it's not working. That would be my guess. Will be useful when we publish tools to local folder, I guess. The funny thing is I pretty much never use publish. I basically just use build. I don't know. So you updated the version numbers here. That's fine. Okay, here's the explanation. Setting these will prevent us from doing unnecessary pack publish for specified projects in local CI when we do it on the entire solution. I guess that's fair. Although, like, why would we? I guess on CI machines, I would build everything. And generally speaking, when you build everything, you also want to put everything to the output folder because, I mean, why would you not? It seems like if you download the build assets, and for some reason you want to get the test binaries, seems something you would want to do. Yeah, I noticed that too. Sometimes the GUIDs don't match for some reason. I mean, I don't think I ever used VS to add a project. I think I only ever did it on the command line. So my guess is probably the command line just emits a different GUID. And by command line, I mean .NET add, .NET SLN add. So this is tool true. It's only useful when packing, but it can be used to customize our own build. We're using project name that is define the common targets to publish the tools into a common folder under publish directory. If unsaid, root namespace will be MSC, so we said it explicitly. Fair enough. You're living a dangerous life, my friend. I mean, root namespace is fine. Project name, not unique, seems problematic. Like, ideally nothing should break, because it's probably just the display name, but I have no idea where project name is used elsewhere. So, that one makes me a bit nervous, but we will see whether that will work out or not. All right, I will just merge this. And then if I don't like something, I will tweak it later. All right, so that's probably going to be a fun exercise. So here's the other question: can I merge now? Can I build on my machine now? Project name is meta only. Don't worry, it works. Yeah. All right, here we go. Best building works. Sweet, sweet, sweet. So far, so good. So let me actually do a quick run through the output folder. And I say quick, but eventually my file explorer will pop up. Here we go. Oh, I see. See, we're still okay. Yep, that's fair. All right, all good. So 1 PR down. So this one I commented on, didn't get a response yet. So this one is interesting. So I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure I like it as it is, but I also don't have any better suggestions right now. I think my inclination, in order to make this not quite as messy as it is right now, was to introduce a base type for our generators and handle some of the things we're doing here. I want to do this when I add another generator, which we actually might today. Because as you can see, there is quite a bit of noise here. The good news is, though, I worked with the people on the Roslyn team, and pretty much everybody who uses generators right now complains that building up strings is not the best of experience. At the same time, though, nobody really wants to build syntax nodes either. I mean, if you ever use the Roslyn syntax APIs, they are, I would say personally, very convenient for reading, very inconvenient for writing. And so right now, one of the guys in the team, Cyrus, he's a machine as far as I can tell. Like, he's outputting PRs at a frequency in which I'm able to, you know, just be able to write code, to read code, like he's writing code. And so he was doing a prototype where he has, I guess, kind of like a fluent API for building up source code. And what's cool is that he takes, basically what he does is he has kind of like a DOM API for building up things. And the DOM API is built off the Roslyn model. So when you basically has methods like emit type, and it takes an iType symbol, right? And so if you want to build up types, you just construct symbols, and then you can just emit type names rather than doing things like this, right? Or emitting them like that. And then for actual statements, they use the iOperation API to construct the statements, and then you just write them. And it makes it a lot easier to read, because here's a lot of like stuff that has just to do with our indentation strategy, right? And I mean, this one helps a little bit, right? Because it takes a little bit of the boilerplate out for indentation and unindentation. But it still feels like it's kind of a, yeah, it's kind of like a lot of noise for what amounts to be a very simple operation, right? And this one here kind of fixes some of this issue, but it still feels like a little bit of a drop in the bucket kind of situation, because the overall thing here is dominated by us concatenating strings. But yeah, I think that's, I don't know, sometimes when I submit PRs and people complain, yeah, but it doesn't fix everything. I'm like, yeah, but it still makes things better. So let's start with something that makes things better and then take it from there. So, yeah, I mean, I saw the comments here and I agree with all of them. The problem is that most of these things here, I guess that's my point, is that I'm not entirely happy with the entire structure, but it's hard for me to nitpick this PR because I've played with some things locally and none of them seem super sexy. So sometimes you just take the PR and then you figure out what to do later. Not a great story for things like .NET Runtime, because you kind of want to work with the contributor because you want to make sure changes are only going in when they have high quality and everybody likes them. For projects like this, where you kind of want to build a community, having a somewhat lower bar of entry, I think, is also useful. Especially because, in contrast to most open source projects, I'm streaming everything I do. So if I fix things later, or if I complain about things that were done later, it's still something that can be learned from, right? Which in no normal open source project isn't the case. The only way you can teach your contributors is by, nitpicking the PR. So that's why I may have a lower bar here than we would have in our production repos. And let's first merge this one here because that one seems obvious. We have a typo. This is one of those things that annoy the living crap out of me, that we can't seem to have consistency across whether we have line endings or not. But it is what it is. It's kind of the Git equivalent of, tabs versus spaces, I guess. All right. So this one here, there's another example of something where I'm not entirely happy with the way it was done, but I also don't know exactly what to do instead. I mean, tests are great, so there's nothing wrong with them. So basically what we have now is we have this diagnostic bag, right? And the diagnostic bag is just a wrapper effectively around a list of T that constructs diagnostics and puts them into the list. The problem is right now we don't really have a differentiator between, do we have diagnostics or do we have errors? And so I don't like this, like splitting them out into two different bags. So I will probably undo that, because I think they really, like, if you think of from a logical standpoint, we don't really care about errors versus warnings, right? The only thing we really care about is, on a given collection, do we have any errors or do we have any warnings, right? So maybe instead of us modeling error diagnostics and modeling diagnostics as an immutable array of diagnostic, maybe we should have an actual diagnostic collection or something like this, where we can effectively, have new properties on that says, do you have any warnings? Do you have any errors, basically, right? Because that's, I guess warnings doesn't even matter, right? What really matters is, do you have any errors? That's kind of the way to think about it. And then even that we might just cheat. Like, as the most simplistic thing we could do is just adding an extension method over immutable array of diagnostic that says has errors. And yes, you do a for each loop, but I mean, for each loop over an array is, in the grand scheme of things, extremely fast. That's one thing processors are really good at. And we only call this method in a few places, so I'm not entirely concerned, even though it's an ON operation, but n tends to be small. And yes, n is not always small, but also you can bail on the first error, so there is that. Interesting. This one I didn't see earlier. Yeah, having a factory method is probably not terrible. in general. I'm not sure I would have made is error the last parameter, but doesn't really matter. Report. Yeah, we should probably rename this to report error then. Yeah, so this is just modeling errors versus warnings, right? So now we're talking about, okay, now we have that. Let's use this to report unreachable code. Yeah, so this is not bad. But I think in the long run, that's not the correct thing to do. So the reason I say that is, I think he even pointed this out himself in the PR. So basically the way this works is he's walking over the syntax directly, the syntax nodes, which works for some cases, right? So cases like this we can detect, right? What's harder are cases like this. And so he pointed out himself that the correct way to do this is control flow graph. The challenge with control flow graph is that the control flow graph only contains bound nodes, right? We don't have syntax nodes in it, which now means that's cool. We can detect that we have unreachable code in our control flow graph, but we don't have an easy way to detect or to report errors because we have no notion of, okay, we have a bound node here, but which syntax node does this correspond to? Or, you know, which line number should we actually report the error on effectively? And so one way to do that is to, so first of all, we have to fix this in the long run anyways, because eventually we want to support debugging. In order for us to support debugging, well, we have to somehow get our line information into the bound nodes. And then on top of that, we also want to support a public query API for the compiler, similar to Roslin's APIs. So Roslin has this ability to ask for a semantic model. And then you can ask questions like, given this expression syntax, what type does this resolve to? And so the way the Roslin APIs work is that they effectively have a map from syntax nodes to bound nodes so that you can ask questions. And the way it's internally done is that effectively the bound nodes point back to the syntax nodes they were created from. And so it wouldn't be hard for us in that world to use that information to report errors, right? Because now we have the bound nodes, we can use the control flow graph, and now we can say, okay, this is the first statement that is unreachable. And then basically that's how you report the error. We don't have that. So again, this goes back to, does it now mean I'm sitting on this PR for the next 5 episodes? Or do I merge this as is and then effectively keep track of this as being a design point that I need to fix? And I'm kind of leaning towards the latter. Because most of the stuff here, even though I'm coming across probably as very nitpicky, but there's some things I just don't like, which is kind of like, yeah, would you put the parameter here or there? That's like, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a reason not to take the PR. And a normal project, you would just comment on this and the person would fix it and then come back. But I'm also inclined to just merge this in because things like this get very quickly out of sync. And then we have merge conflicts again. And then this one is basically like, okay, which file is this actually in diagnostic bag? Oh, interesting. This switch statement is directly in the diagnostic bag. I guess that works too. Yeah, where does he actually call the method? Port unreachable. Okay, he calls it from the binder, yes. Interesting. Yeah. 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 I guess. I mean, you basically have to do it from the binder right now because we have no way to put this in a separate phase, because then we have the same problem and no longer have the syntax nodes. Yeah, all things I can think of and to address this would make this PR effectively unmergeable. So it's probably better to merge and then fix. Yeah. I see Windows wants you to start the PC to finish installing updates. Yes. And I don't know how to say this nicely, but I think my response to Windows is, yeah, I'm on insider builds, so there is basically not a single day where I don't have updates, and this is not the time. There's a time and there's a place, and this is neither the time nor the place. This is the reason I did the scripts that way. All right, let me copy and paste this genomes URL, which is actually surprisingly difficult. I don't follow. Like, what you point to a batch file, but like what is the reason for that batch file? I think you can pull that branch and make small changes there if you want to. Yes, I mean that's, I think most people don't know is, as the unless the person disabled that. So the way GitHub works, right? When you submit a PR to a repo you don't have push permissions to, you fork the repo. Then you have your own branch in your own repo, and then you submit a PR from your own branch, from your own repo to the other person's repo and the other person's branch. But there's a setting that by default is on, which allows the owner of the other repo to push to your branch. So I can actually check out the PR, make changes to it in the sense that I can add commit, I can rebase, and I can update your. I'm not sure I can actually force rebase your branch, probably not, but I can push additional changes on top unless you uncheck the box that disallows the PR owner to do that. So I could do that. The problem is that is also not a winning proposition probably in our case, because, for example, I mean, I could change the parameter, for example, but that seems more work than just doing that after I merged. And then all the other big things I can think of, like, yeah, basically, in order for me to re-architect this thing into the way I want, I probably want this on a separate episode, right? And doing that in another person's PR seems complicated. So, yes. I don't know, I love Git, I like playing with these things, but sometimes you just make your own life more miserable by doing these advanced things. Alright, so now I have to find the PR back that I just opened. Okay, this was the... Yeah, this is the one. Here we go. Yeah, so this is an interesting approach. So the reason I don't like this is not because it's the wrong code, it's because the wrong code is sprinkled through the code base. But I guess it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's still, so again, Please don't read my lack of enthusiasm here as not being appreciative of the PRs. In my head, I'm just trying to figure out what to do with it, and that's causing me some anxiety. But I'm very much in love with all the PRs I'm getting. Like, even if I don't like a PR, or even if I don't like the feature itself, I'm extremely thankful that we have a community of people here that are engaged and have ideas and contribute the ideas, because the whole point of this project is not to ship a product, right? The whole point of this thing is to I guess spread the love for compilers, and also making it so that the whole thing becomes approachable, right? Because I feel like compilers have this cloud of mystery over them, and it is largely unwarranted, right? I mean, you can tell by the way the episodes are going and by the amount of typos I'm making that I'm nowhere near a rock star, right? I'm a very normal person. Yes, I studied computer science, but so did many of you as well. And building a compiler is really not this extraordinary feat, right? It's basically just any other code. It's a library, sometimes with a command line driver on top of it. But that's really my motivation here, right? So that's why but still, like, sometimes when you write code, you still want to do a good job, right? So there's this conflict of, what do I want to do? Where do I want to take the project? And also making sure that people can actually contribute cool stuff. So that's a general thing that I saw as well. Like, rule of thumb is, when you submit PRs to project, don't change the world in your PR. That has to do with just being nice to the contributor, to the repo owner, that you don't reformat the world, right? That's usually a bit of a dick move. It's like you go to somebody else's living room and you redecorate it. It's like seems a bit inappropriate. But then there's also your PR is not the only PR, right? And the more PRs you have, it gets important that the PRs are smallish in the sense that they are independently mergeable. Because as soon as you have this problem that some person edits pretty much every file, as soon as you merge this PR, now everybody else has to accommodate that change, right? And so white space changes are generally considered don't do them kind of thing, because they just make everybody else's life miserable. And sometimes, when the code base is not correctly formatted to the code base own style guides, that should be cleaned up, but that should probably be done by the owner, and it probably should be done in one PR. And ideally, you don't do this all the time, right? That's why most code projects are trying really hard in the beginning to have consistent style, and then from there on, it's just whatever style the file is in, keep it that way. Yeah, but I guess I'm preaching to the choir here. Most people know that already. All right, so let me merge this, because I think it's a cool feature that we want. It's just that our compiler doesn't have the right architecture to do the feature in the way I would like it to be done. And so this is what? So I said something to the extent of, like, this is a... Yeah. I might close this if there's no response on that one. All right, so I think I call this a day for merging, and then from there on it's into the code. I guess we should probably create a branch at this point. What is our episode number? Is it 25? No, can't be 25. Is it 25? It says 25 on Twitch, but, like, is it actually 25? No, it can't be 25. It must be 26, actually. I was about to say, I think I've seen the number 24, 25 before. Check out episode 26. Here we go. yeah, so I think what I will do now is I will go over the code base, literally more or less file by file, and we'll create myself a to-do list of things I want to do or want to change. And then some of them will be bugs that we will do later. Some of them will be things we do today. And then this way we get on top of things. So let me start with this one here. So actually, let's start with this. So we already have to-do markers, which I think are generally the way to do things. No pun intended. It doesn't really work for larger code bases. And it also doesn't work for larger teams necessarily, but I found it's a good way to keep track of work, because it's extremely low overhead and an easy way to find things. The challenge is, and that's I think where it stops working for most people, is that you need to be somewhat consistent in the markups that you use. So I generally use to do and hack. These are my two things. To do usually means here's something I could do, like nothing bad happens. And then there is hack, which is like, okay, this really needs to go. Like if this remains in the code base, I'll be ashamed of myself. Or for things that are just, fairly gross temporary hacks that are outside of my control, right? Sometimes you have things like, well, the compiler has a bug, so I need to make forward progress, but we should probably fix this, but I have this gross workaround here that we will do to accommodate that bug fix. So I'm not ashamed of doing it. It's just something that, it's kind of like dirty clothing. You kind of want to get rid of it eventually. And then to do is, all sorts of things, right? Missing feature work, small improvements, right? And some people have more advanced things where they have perf or other things that they keep track of. I'm a simple man, so I try to keep the number of things that I do simple so that I can remember them, because if I have too many labels, then I will also forget searching for them. So I will not search for perf, for example. That's not how I work. So hack, we have a decent amount of them. And again, this is an example of, I'm not ashamed of this. I mean, it took me a while to figure this out, right? But I don't want this in the long run in the code base. It's just that until VS Code has support for generators, you have to go to do what you have to go to do. And then that's the same thing here, right? Now, this is something I want to get rid of. So, well, actually, why do I open? So here's the thing I notice with myself. I don't know about you, but sometimes you have this where you like, I can't believe I'm that dumb. So I'm clearly in VS Code, right? So I'm clearly in an environment that is very good with opening as many documents as you want. Why would I open another text editor? Like, where would this window go now? Like, why would I do this to myself? That makes absolutely no sense. So what I want to do here is, I think, because I guess no, why would I want to put this file? I think I want to put the file in the root somewhere, because, and then probably something like to do. That's a file I don't want to check in, but it's a file that I want to have. So, and now here's where we keep track of things. So what did I say? There was this guy here, right? Actually, we have this here. So one thing that is cool now with VS Code, which maybe I changed my opinion on this, because they have issue tracker integration here, which is super nice. So I can actually hover over this number now, and it will tell me this is the issue number. And that's cool, right? That is one thing that I actually like. So probably what I will do more moving forward is actual file issues and reference them from a to-do marker in source code. And that's kind of cool, right? So we should do number 141, and you get even IntelliSense as you're entering them, which is nice. Make generated code, or I should say use nullable annotations. So that's certainly one thing we want to do. What else do we have? That's the same thing, I guess. Yeah, that's the generator thing. Yeah, that's the same issue here. Number 141. Cool. To do. What else do we have? Yeah, short source code evaluation, which... Do we actually have a bug for that? I thought I found one. If not, I should. Yes, I do. So that would be this guy. Yep. We don't rewrite conditional go-tos where the condition is always true. We should handle this here because we should really rewrite those to unconditional go-tos in the first place. Past me clearly hates me. Because past me did not a good job explaining future me what past me meant. We don't rewrite conditional go-tos where the condition is always true. We shouldn't handle this here because we should really rewrite those into unconditional go-tos in the first place. Oh, I see now. Okay, so we're in the lower. What we really should be doing, and I'm amazed we don't do this. No, we're doing this clearly, right? So I think this comment is just stale. That's another reason that, like, some people are just massively like, oh my god, comments are bad because they get out of sync. So what? Delete them when they're out of sync. So I'm pretty sure this is the right thing to do here, right? We basically say if the condition here is always true or false, then we either create an unconditional go-to statement or we create a knob. Right? And the reason we create a knob is because we have no way to delete a statement, right? Like the best we can do is just make it a no-op. So we're saying can fall through is return statement or go-to statement. So I'm not entirely sure is what this meant though. We shouldn't handle this here. I think this can just be deleted. Unless I'm missing something. Chat can tell me if I'm going wrong somewhere. To do and hack are my go-to labels. If you say you go-to labels, you really mean you use them for your go-to statements? Or do you mean that's the statements that's the labels you use when you add comments? Either way, it's funny. I'm on episode 9. Okay. You have apparently 16 episodes to catch up. All right, so that seems reasonable. Yeah, null annotations. That's another one we should do. Null annotations in other projects. Yeah, then one thing we should do is we get rid of the Evaluator as a whole. To do get rid of Evaluator in favor of emitter. There's a bug for this. Use emitter in REPL. So the evaluator is effectively gross, right? Because it's interpreting our bound tree, which is not per se gross or bad, but it just duplicates logic, right? Instead of us doing that, we should just compile IL in memory and run that, right? Because we have an emitter, the emitter can create an assembly, and we can just take the assembly and load it, right? There are some challenges around that, because now you're mixing what you're compiling against and what you're running against, right? Which can be problematic, but the way you would solve this problem is by saying, well, it just means when I'm using this compiler for memory stuff, I just have to match the runtime I'm on, right? Which in our compiler we can do, because we already have the nice indirection that when we compile, we select the references on, we basically select which MS caller we're compiling against, right? So we can totally match the runtime we're running on. So long the runtime has all the APIs that our compiler depends on, like string concat and all the other types, right? But that's the... Yeah, I'm not going to add this to this list here because I'm not sure I want to do this today. Yeah. I don't want to have them as separate properties, but also I think, like, not sure how to track them. I guess one way to do it is to just literally put markers here right now. To do, I think we should not have separate collections, but instead have an extension method over yeah. What else do we have here? So this is yeah, we should rename this. Let's actually do this one here. It seems I like symmetry. Yeah, I will probably move this here. I think probably eventually we will end up with something that is kind of more like a severity rather than a bool, but it's always good to start small. Compilation. So yeah, this one is again one of those examples where I still think we need to fix some stuff here. So yeah, one thing we should fix is to do references should be part of the compilation, not arguments for emit, right? Because if you think about it, realistically what compilation should be, it's kind of like 99% of what you pass to the compiler as command line arguments. I'm saying 99% because some things really only make sense as argument for emits, like what is the output path. That does make sense to be part of the compilation, but the compilation should represent everything that you need in order to make sense of the code, right? And by and large, the references you have, the saving grace, I guess, for us right now is that we really don't use references anywhere but emit, because we have our own type system. But in the perfect world, what we would do is we would say, well, we would process the references as part of compilation and symbol resolution, right? So for example, we would say print and input are just functions, but they're not visible unless you can actually import a function console.readline and console.writeline, right? And if you don't have them, then the input function and the print function are just not available to you, right? That would be, and same with types. You would say the presence of these symbols is conditioned on the underlying thing they're binding to. Right, that would be the clean way of doing it. I think I'm happy with this. I think I'm happy with that. They're very simple helpers. Yeah. I think I was generally happy with those guys. I think one thing we should do is we should say to do all constructors should be internal. So the reason I said it is we really don't want to be able to construct syntax nodes outside of the compiler, because there's certain constraints on how syntax nodes can be constructed, like who can be nested in whom, that are enforced by the parser. And I think we don't want to have them exposed as constructors. In Roslyn, you have a syntax factory to produce syntax nodes, because they have syntax node-based rewrites, which we don't have, because we don't have refactorings or any sort of rewriting realistically. But if we do them, I would probably make them text-based anyway, and not syntax node based. So I think for now the compiler should just make these internal. That's another general strategy I think that works well for library authors, is be selective of what you expose. People often say just expose everything so that your consumers have maximum flexibility. The problem with that approach is you have to choose. I think it's reasonable to say you give your consumers maximum flexibility, but I think you have to choose between, do you give them maximum flexibility, or do you want to have low number of breaking changes for your consumers? Because you can't have both. Because as soon as you expose everything that you have, you make your own life harder, and by extension your customers' life harder, because backwards compatibility gets really complicated, right? The more extension points you have, the more things that are open, the harder it becomes for you to make changes without breaking somebody somewhere. So that's why I tend to be very selective about what I'm exposing and what flexibility do I give my consumers. I want these things to be designed, usually, not artifacts of throwing over the fence kind of thing. Yeah, these things make sense to me. It's the same here, I think. Our symbols to do constructors should be internal. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Lowering, there isn't much. I think I'm happy with what that looks like. Oh boy, the emitter. Yeah, so the emitter is, I think, deserves the name gross right now. And it's not necessarily because the emitter all up is gross. I think I like the general traversal that we have here. So let me actually open up the outline. So I think I like the general structure that we have here with like a top-down traversal. which is very similar to what we do in the binder. I'm not sure I like the fact that we pass around the IL processor. I think I'd rather have that a field. Because we already have the notion of like the current method kind of thing. So it seems reasonable to have this notion of a current. Do we have a current method actually? No, I think we don't have that because we pass this guy around. I think I will probably do the same thing I do in the binder, because the binder has this notion of what function are you binding. And so it's same thing here, what function are you emitting? Seems like a reasonable thing. And you can't really multi-thread this. I mean, you could probably, but yeah, I guess you could multi-thread it. It's just you basically have to be careful for shared state. And that would make the method signatures much easier to read. But what I really don't like is the constructor, right? The constructor is this, let's do a gazillion things. Specifically, let's import the world. That one I really don't like. So I think this part here needs refactoring. And I think we want some sort of, resolver kind of thing that does that for us. So to do this constructor does too much. Resolution should be factored out. What terminal do you use? I like the Git integration. I personally use this one here, which is Porsche Git plus the Windows terminal. I use Cascadia as my font, which comes with these power lines, which makes it, in my opinion, very sexy. But I don't like the integrated terminal, to be honest, in VS Code. To me, it's like I'd rather have a full screen window like this, and then I use just the Windows hotkeys to just toggle between them, because I feel like that gives me more screen real estate without me having to mess around with Windows. That's why I'm generally not a fan of terminal integration into the IDE. Especially because VS Code is not really taking advantage of multiple windows. Sorry, multiple monitors. So that seems another reason to not do that. All right, so we have the emitter, which is great. Binder. So the binder, I think I'm content with as well, by and large. There's some things here that may need some love, and there's some decisions we have to make, I think. So right now our binder, for example, is stateful, which means we have a single binder instance for each phase, right? So we have a global phase where we just bind the global scope. And then we have a program state where we effectively bind every single function. That might not be great, because you probably want to bind all functions independently using tasks for throughput reasons. And that's harder when you all party on the same instance, right? So we probably want one binder per function eventually. But I think, I don't know, like I feel like the general structure makes sense. The amount of private state that this guy holds is very limited, so I'm quite happy with that. And again, the general way it's being encoded here makes sense to me. Yeah, see, if you ever look at the Roslyn codebase, their binder it's very different. So their binder is immutable. So effectively each binder, so every time you change some environmental state, so for example, let's look at the, where is it? A while statement, right? So we have this find loop body. So what I would do here is I basically modify my instance to say, keep track of what the labels are, right? And then, you know, basically push a label here and then bind the body, you basically create a new binder that has a particular break label and particular continue label, and then each binder effectively has, you know, immutable state. And the binder just has a property called current break statement, current break continuous label, right? And this way you keep track of that. But that's because the way C# does binding is very different from the way we do binding right now. So the way we bind is we bind in two phases and we bind everything. C# doesn't do that because in an IDE context, you don't want to bind the entire file in order to, let's say, hover over this one method call. So what C# does is it does also binding in phases, but it tries to be as lazy as possible. So if you hover over this identifier, they don't even bind the entire method body. They basically try to bind only the parts that are necessary to reason about this statement here, right? Which means, yeah, you have to declare locals that came before, right, and all of that. And you have to define properties on the type and all of that. But they don't bind like everything else, right? In order to do that, you kind of want to have a way where you can almost traverse things independently. And again, if traversal is harder when binding has side effects and mutate state, because then it gets tricky to reason about what you can do in which order. And so that's why they have a more complicated system. Since we don't do that, we get away with this, and I have to say I like this right now because it's very few things, and sometimes immutable state is just easier to reason about than chaining everything through, right? And unless you need to chain everything through because you need to be immutable, do the simpler thing. What else? Yeah, so constant folding. So one thing that I didn't like here was I didn't like the name. Compute constant. I think I want to rename this to fold. Oh yeah, before I forget, there was one thing in the lower that I wanted to do, which is, so I don't like the readability of this. Like, it's not terrible, but I think it would be much easier if we had factory methods for these guys, because then we can nest them visually and we get rid of some of the noise, like creating statements like that. So how about we say to do, consider creating a bound node factory to construct nodes to make lowering easier to read. So what do I mean by this? Well, it's basically like, imagine you had a factory, and imagine you import the factory with using static factory. That means now you can have method calls. So you don't even have to qualify this thing. And so you could do things like this, right? You would say block, right? And then you could say go to false, and then effectively else label. And then you would say here's a condition. I guess in this case you could just say node condition. And then what do we have? Then we have the node then statement. Right? But you get the idea, right? If you want to say, you would say if, you could say and x, y, right? Stuff like this. And then the idea would be that you just nest them similar to Lisp, right? To actually have structure. And that would make certain things much easier to read. I did this locally at some point as an experiment, and I really, really like the output. It requires a little bit of boilerplate in the factory, but I don't know. It gets more annoying, I guess, down here, right, where it gets extremely noisy. And if you can nest them properly, it's easier. Things like binary expression, for example, where you have to pass in tokens and types and all of that stuff. What you really want to say is something like add, right? Or yeah, add effectively, right? And then you just pass in the left and right expression. It's not, yeah, the most important thing, but it does help. Okay, Nimal just shared a link, lazy binder. I mean, that's not really the lazy binder, right? That's just the way C# binds types, right? So if you declare a type called async, then yeah, you can of course say this, which is your current instance, right? Is not is the new pattern that you have, that we have. Async is not our type name, and or is anything, right? So I mean, it reads funny, I give you that, but knowing normal C# rules, that's not entirely surprising. I brought my Windows terminal into the WinX context menu. How do you do that? If anybody has ideas for that, I'll be massively thankful. So that is that. I think in terms of to-dos, that's enough for now. Let me just commit the changes we made so far. Except for these two things, we want to work on those guys. Yeah, so we said fold. I think I can probably commit this one here and say rename compute constant to fold. Reorder is error parameter. Yep, this is just the rename of this guy. Rename report to report error. Add link to issue. Constructor should be internal. Yeah, I guess that's taken care of. Alright, so this is just to-dos now. Add to-dos. remove obsolete to do. All right, happy with that. So now let's actually do this. Use nullable annotation. So one thing we do right now, so in our syntax, we have, let's say, return statement. Where the heck is it? Return statement. We are saying that expression is optional, right? At the same time, if you go to get children here, and we go to return statement, we always yield it. So, which now means if the thing is null, we actually return null from here, which is problematic because we generally don't expect to get null nodes when we're enumerating the tree. So of course I could change the generated code to surround every single yield with an if check, but that doesn't make a lot of sense because most things aren't nullable. So that would be just redundant. And so the way we will do this is we will go to our generator here. And yeah. Where is this code? So basically it's here, right? So this is when we have a simple property. This is when we use an immutable array. And this is when we use a separated syntax list. So in both cases, when there's collections involved, they already guarantee there's no nulls in them because that's how they are parsed effectively. So the only case where we need an if statement would be here. So how do we know this? Well, we can ask. So we can actually say var can be null. That is property, not that one. Property nullable annotation is nullable annotation annotated. So this is the simple case where the whole property is effectively marked. It gets more tricky if you have properties like, you know, IEnumable of string question mark, right? If you want to know whether the inner string here is question mark or not, that gets a bit more tricky because now you have to deal with the generic type structures and other stuff. But if you just have a simple case like, you know, foo property, you can basically ask here whether the property is not annotated or not. And then we say if can be null, then we use our curly thingy here, I guess. So how would we do this? We would say I guess in this case it's probably easier to cheat, right? We can probably say here indent text writer, write line, if property name is null, I guess not null, and then we say if can be null, then we do the opposite. Yeah, so this is an example where I don't like the resulting structure right now because it's so nested. I lose track of where I am. So I think I probably want to change the way these guys work. But for now, let's go with that. So one trick now is, I think I had to do some gymnastics to get the new version of of the generator to actually work. So let me close Visual Studio here. And I think I had to kill isn't there an MS build process somewhere? No? Okay, so if I do this then. Alright. Clearly we generated the file, but that is under source, Minsk, called analysis, syntax. What is that? Syntax node. So what's your problem here? Oh my god. Don't we hate it when we make dumb mistakes like this? Didn't use an interpolated string. So that means, let's open this guy again. All we have to do is this. There we go. So if you don't terminate these guys, the generator will be reused from the previous build that you had, and you don't see your changes. So this worked. So that now means if I now look at the generated syntax nodes, they should have the correct if statement in there. Here we go. And as you can see, there's not much null, right? There's a function declaration type is optional. If statement, the else clause can be null. The return statement, the expression can be null. And then a variable declaration type clause can be null. So it's not much that can be null in our syntax node. So that's why nullable reference types are actually quite nice. So now that means if I go to search for hack, so we should be able to get rid of this. And this. Right? I see we deleted a bunch of white space. Okay, that's cool. That one is taken care of, and then this one is taken care of. Honor nullable annotations in code generator, in source generator. This fixes 141. Except I don't want to do that. Sweet. So we now go to our to-do list. This one is done. You could add a no reuse argument in the build script. Yeah, I could. The challenge is usually not that. The challenge is that VS launches their own processes, right? The problem is VS Code, really. Not the command line build. All right, now annotations in other projects. Now let's actually do that. So Nullable. So the generators themselves. Let's remove this one. Oopsie. Ba-dum. Okay, where does this guy come from? Syntax no type. Yes, we should probably say if syntax no type is null, return. In fact, we should probably do this for all three types. If any of them is null, then something bad has happened and there's no point in continuing. That almost fixed all the null references. Yeah, fine, be like this. Kind of amazed that this does not cause a warning. I would have expected that to still cause a warning because... Really? How is that possible? Why? How does it infer that current is nullable? That is amazing. So what happens if I put the type here? Then I would get a warning? Yeah, now I get a warning. So does var always resolve to nullable now? Or does it say, oh, because you do a null check for the local variable that I treated as nullable? Wow. Jason Box says, I thought we should do object is null rather than object equals null. Yeah, the compiler team says that. I don't buy that argument. I mean, yes, there's some theoretical benefit of doing it, and you could argue it's cleaner or whatever, or it's more aesthetic, which both are things I think are valid. The argument the compiler team makes is that if you say is null, it's always a reference null check, right? Versus if you say double equal to null, you effectively invoke the operator equals, right? And the operator equals can do whatever it wants, right? Like in principle, you can write an operator equals method that does not actually correctly check for null, right? And so in that sense, from a language puristic standpoint, object obj is null is always the same as object reference equals, right? But in practice, if you have a reference type that does not correctly compare to null, that is not a bug you're very likely to ship. Like nothing will work when you do that because there's null comparisons freaking everywhere. So I don't know. Call me old school, but replacing everything with is null seems weird to me. All right, so that would be that one. And now it's actually 0 warnings. Do I believe that? Well, I guess we did annotate this one correctly then. Add null or enable nullable in Minsk generators. And then tests. Annotated text. So what does this guy do again? So we parse text. That makes sense. Yeah, this guy clearly needs to be nullable. Yep, that makes sense. Let's go to this guy here, the asserting enumerator, takes a syntax node. Do we even do any null here? No. All right. Fix tokens, enum get values. My text is not null. Sorry, fix tokens is an enumerable of syntax kind string question mark. Question mark. So first of all, let's cast this guy away to I guess this one doesn't really matter here, right? Because we never read this guy. So this would be a tuple of type syntax kind and string. What's your problem here? Oh, semicolon. Yeah, so now it's a nullable enumerable. I don't know whether enumerable is nullable though. That seems a bit weird. Does get values return null? No. So who is returning a nullable enumerable then? Cast? No. Select? No. Where? No. Cast? No. What? Why do you think this enumerable is nullable? I am so confused. Look, I only work here. It doesn't mean I know anything. So why do you think this is nullable? I mean, an array is... So what are we targeting here? We're targeting netcrab 3.1. Okay, so this guy should be null annotated then, right? So if I go here, Clearly this is null annotated then. I see. Yeah, so this one should be. Yeah, I don't know why this thing thinks it's null. It's not a big problem, I'm just confused. Well, the problem is, so yes, the first problem was that text was supposed to be nullable because syntax text get text returns nullable string, right? That's fine. So we said here is the condition where we compare to not null, which unfortunately link inference is not good enough. So the type of this is still a nullable for the tuple element. That's fine, which I cast away here, right? So now the string here is no longer considered nullable. But the entire IEnumable is supposed to be nullable. And that, I don't understand where that's coming from. Because get values here, the way I read it is, it returns a non-nullable array. Well, cast will just cast. It will not introduce any nulls. So you have the same input as the output kind of thing. Select clearly doesn't introduce nulls. Where clearly doesn't introduce any nulls. So, and then cast also doesn't. So I don't know why C# thinks that this IEnumable is nullable. I'm just confused by that IntelliSense. But so parser test, what is? Yeah, so this is, we can assert that these guys are non-null. Otherwise bad things will happen in our test. I mean, I guess the canonical way to do this is assert not null. Actually, the big question here is XUnit annotated? Probably not. So in this case, probably the way to do it is this one here, but we can do the next best thing, which is debug assert then we can do the exact same thing here. If you're using XUnit, you're better off using a theory instead. You mean in the Lexer test? I'm using theories, but that's this is not a test. This is constructing data that I expose to a theory. So yeah, see, so the getTokens method here is used by getTokens data, and getToken data is input to theories, right? So this guy here, for example, and I'm theory data I don't think helps me here because I need to combine dynamic things I have to compute with static data. Can't syntax text get text return an empty string in the case where you currently return null? It probably could, but here's the thing, right? So if I say get text, null here means this token kind doesn't have a fixed text, right? So let's say we have a, I mean, it may not make sense, right? But if you ask, for example, give me the text for this comment, right? Then, or for this string or for this identifier, we return null because it's not that it has a string and the value is empty, it doesn't have one, right? So in this case, I think null is the correct answer because you are asking for a token kind that does not have a fixed text, which is different from it has a fixed text and the text is empty. I mean, you could just argue that empty is effectively a magic placeholder because no token can have the empty string, but at that point I think you're just playing tricks with your type system. All right, so that seems reasonable. If I build now, it should build. Yeah, what was my last comment? Yeah, let me copy paste this guy. And then let me create a PR. Episode 26. What do we call this? I guess. Yeah, here's another word I can never spell in the English language, which is miscellaneous. So my approach is I just enter a random set of characters until I get close, and then here you go. I guess I want to preview this because I want to mark it as a draft PR. And while I'm at it, might as well mark it episode. For a moment I was like, these are way too many commits. I must have messed up my branches, but we actually had that many commits. Surprisingly enough. Question on debug assert. Last week somebody asked if this would break on release versions. It might not, right? Well, it depends on what you mean by break. So the way debug assert works is that you effectively tell the compiler. So if you go back to our test here, where was this parser test here? So what you tell the compiler is, I assert that this thing is not null, right? But yes, debug assert, if you go to the definition of debug assert, it has this conditional attribute on it, which means if this preprocessor symbol is set, the compiler will emit a call to this method. If this is not set, then the compiler will remove the call to this method, right? And in our case, it also means that whatever expression we had here is not getting evaluated, right? So if this has side effects, it just gets entirely dropped on the floor. So effectively, when you compile for release, where debug is not set, these calls disappear. So in that sense, it breaks in release builds in the sense that this assert doesn't get triggered or it doesn't get executed. But the reason we don't care is that this is effectively your way to tell the compiler this thing cannot be null, right? And that is a factual statement of your program, right? And that factual statement doesn't change between debug and release. So the compiler will honor this thing no matter whether you compile for release or not. It just means that the resulting assert never gets emitted, right? In the same way that when you have a program where you say in the middle of the program, I assert this argument cannot be null. Well, in debug tests, you're actually paying the price for the check, but you assume, of course, that in release builds, because you already ran the debug builds, that you don't have to do this anymore, right? So it depends on what you mean by it breaks for release, I guess. I asked if a call to debug assert would be taken into account for reference type nullability inference, even in release builds. Yes, it does. Which I would argue is what is the behavior you want. Because if you can, like, let's ignore nullable for a moment, right? If you have release code along the lines of, like, you know, console.writeLine or op text, op1 text length, right? And now let's pretend for a moment that this is not test code, right? Assume this is in your product code, right? Well, if you have code like this, well, you're basically saying, well, I assume because I'm in the deep bowels of my engine that somebody else already verified that this thing cannot be null. So I'm asserting this. So in the case when I mess it up, my tests will fail, right? But then of course you still run in release builds, right? And in release builds, you assume this thing to be non-null, right? Even though this check doesn't get executed, right? It doesn't change the fact that you stated your assumption about your program, and that assumption is supposed to hold up both in release mode as well as in non-release mode, right? That's why the only correct behavior, in my opinion, is yes, the call doesn't get emitted in release builds, but of course the statement you made is still honored by the C# null inference. Otherwise, why bother with debug asserts to begin with, right? I hope that explanation made sense. I mean, I'm not sure why it's surprising. I guess if you know too much about compilers, maybe it's surprising, but I find that intuitive. CI runs in release mode. Is that okay then? I guess CI... Do we run release mode? We probably should not run in release mode. Would be my knee-jerk reaction. Like, it seems, I think tests you don't want to run in release mode in general. Like, you want to run them in debug mode. Because, yeah, otherwise your asserts never get triggered. Which, I mean, your test will fail, but now they will fail instead of a good assert, you will get a random null reference exception somewhere, right? But yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it depends on what you want to do your CI to do, I guess. I mean, I think the way we build .NET Core is I think we build both. Actually, I don't know. No, I'm curious. What do we do? Can I easily see that? Probably not, right? How do I find out what our configuration is here? Is it under config? Probably not, right? Config is some random stuff. Do we have any workflow files in here anywhere? I guess YAML files is the way to check for this. I can probably cheat. I can probably just click on the latest build and then see what the build log says. So we clearly run different operating systems. But yes, it looks like so we have basically a bunch of release builds and we have a bunch of debug builds. So yeah, we build both. That's probably what we should do here as well. Because I mean, you know, we don't pay for CI really, so might as well. Yeah, the statement goes away in release mode, but not entirely since its post conditions still get used in Roslyn. Yeah, I guess so. I guess another way to think about this is that maybe I know too much about the compilers that I don't find it surprising, because the way I think about null inference is that it's effectively just a type system thing, right? So it doesn't really require execution, right? So in that sense, the compiler looks at your code and then effectively, you know, some part of the compiler, the optimizer, if you will remove calls to things that have the conditional attribute on it, but the type checking and the soundness, whatever analysis you want to call this, was done with this thing present, right? So, but I guess to me, it's really more about the intent, right? Like from an intentional standpoint, as a developer, I would want nullable inference to use this post condition, right? Even though I don't want to pay the cost at runtime. I guess that's the way to think about this, not in compiler terms. I mean, I don't even know whether it's removed in a later phase or not, right? It's more about the intuition of what you would want the compiler to do. If you want to run CI in release mode, in case you have it defined, in case you have it devs and you want CI to capture test the true final version. Sorry, I don't understand. You want to run CI in release mode in case you have if devs and you want CI to capture test the true final version. Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm saying I think we probably want to run both, right? You basically want to make sure that the thing you give customers is working, but you probably also want to test your debug builds, because if your debug builds fail but your release builds don't, usually something bad is going on. And if your release builds fail and your debug builds don't, then something even worse is going on. But also usually when they will both fail, but then one of them has better diagnostics. Because the other problem with if devs is you can have if devs in crazy ways. So generally speaking, you want to run both. And there is a way to do this in parallel. I think the way this works is we have these, so we only use steps, but there is, I forgot, they have like a hierarchy of things. I think they have jobs and steps. And so we would have 2 jobs, one for release and one for debug. But the thing is, in principle, it's a simple change, but because it's a YAML file, it will take us a 2-hour stream, so I'm not going to do it right now. I hate YAML with a passion. It's this, and it's, in fairness, it's not just YAML, right? It's the whole, I guess it's the CI configuration problem, right? Which even if it's XML, it would not be much better, but the fact that it's YAML format, it doesn't help in my opinion. Nirmal says I can do a PR. Yeah, that would be cool. Like I think I know roughly what this would do. I think there's this thing called, I forgot, like jobs. You can basically say logically for each over an array with 2 values, one with release and one with debug, right? So we don't want to duplicate the entire logic here. That will be the, the matrix version. But you basically say multiply these values and then give me builds for that. In fact, we probably want to do that. So if you do a matrix build, you might as well just go all the way and then do a matrix build across Windows and Linux. And debug and release, so do 4 different builds. That would be cool, really. I mean, that might mean I run out of build time minutes quickly, but anyway. I think that's all I had for today. So I'm already down to 25 people because I think the other people are bored. So I hope you had fun. I don't know, like sometimes I like episodes like this where we just clean up stuff and chat a little bit about various aspects. And there's probably some more stuff we can do. I mean, I'm happy with where the project is right now. And there's some more cleanup that probably needs to happen. As I said, I'm not liking the generator right now because it's super messy. But by and large, I like where we are, and there's cool stuff. So I will see you next week. Next Wednesday is my next stream. If you haven't, do me a favor and check out Build, because there's a bunch of really cool sessions. Like start with the .NET sessions, the Hanselman and Hunter demo. They have a longer version on channel 9 recorded that is 1 hour and a half. It's packed with demos. I watched it yesterday. It's actually quite entertaining. Make sure you watch Guthrie's keynote. Also very entertaining. Make sure to watch it all the way to the end. It's worth it. And then whatever you fancy, right? In case you didn't know, let me just quickly show you. If you go to channel 9, you click on events, you click on build. For some reason, we have 2019, 2020, and 2018. Sorting is a hard problem in computer science, apparently. But here it is, and you have, this view is not super useful, but it's kind of interesting to see the diverse set of topics we had and speakers and all of that. But you can also just directly jump to a particular speaker that you care about. So for example, Daniel Roth. If you want to know anything about Blazor, here's your talk. What is width? Yeah, that nobody cares about width. But the thing that you want to look for is, I mean, the UI is kind of hilarious here, but Scott Hunter. So the journey to one.net, very entertaining. All right, and then another thing I would be massively thankful for is if you could follow me on Twitch and subscribe to my YouTube, so that you know when the next episode is up. In case you actually missed the live, you at least get access to the recordings. And then I see you next Wednesday, and we will, I don't know what I will do next Wednesday yet, but I will pick something awesome. We might start with debugging at some point, but I don't want to promise it too much. And yeah, then I wish you a great weekend. Enjoy, relax. In my case, Monday is off, so I will probably have a somewhat relaxed weekend, and you should do the same thing. Like the pandemic is sucky, so spend time with your family, enjoy the time off, and do whatever you want to do. Bye-bye.